Joining me now here on set with me, and former federal prosecutor and former Justice Department lawyer, along with Josh Gerstein, senior legal affairs writer for Politico. Both of you, thank you for being with us. And Josh, we'll start with you. What has stood out to you in everything that we've learned since the meeting between Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell?
Well, I have to say, Ariel, that the things that we've heard just in the last 24 hours about a potential pardon really is what jumps out at me about these discussions that have been taking place over the last 48 hours, because they're just not the way a criminal investigation is normally conducted. And it's hard to see in this case how Ghislaine Maxwell, who was charged by the Justice Department with lying under oath, would ever be a good witness against anybody else. And if that's the case, then you really don't see sort of a path from here to prosecution of someone else in the Epstein matter. And therefore, you start to wonder, is this part of a deal to reduce her sentence, as that victim you just heard from discussed, in exchange for her perhaps accusing one of the president's political enemies of some involvement here, but that person then not actually being charged with anything?
Okay, so to that end, Brendan, how unusual is all of this, where you see the Assistant Attorney General heading down to meet with someone who's been convicted of very serious crimes? What do you make of all of that?
You know, there's precedent for interviewing people who have been convicted before, so that's not terribly unusual. What is unusual is exactly what you said, which is Todd Blanche, the #2 official at the Justice Department, conducting this interview.
And the president's former personal attorney.
You nailed it. You know, I have never heard of that happening. The Deputy Attorney General essentially runs the entire Department of Justice. They should not be involved in individual investigations. And what this says to me is twofold. One, it's a clear message to Maxwell and her attorney that they have a direct line to the president in these negotiations. And it also suggests that the president is really scared of what Maxwell might say and only wants to send somebody that he can trust.
And we keep hearing that she was offered limited immunity as it pertained to those discussions with the DOJ. So break down exactly what that means.
You know, the limited immunity is actually kind of the least corrupt of what seems to be an extremely corrupt process here. So, you know, people can be offered immunity in exchange for potential cooperation. But as Josh has just said, you know, this is a witness that the Department of Justice previously accused of perjury. This is a witness who has every incentive to lie in order to get advantage here. So there's nothing that she could say that could plausibly help in future criminal prosecutions other than corrupt ones.
All right. And Josh, did the Justice Department go into this interview knowing that they had something to give her? That was this a quid pro quo? Were they going to get information in exchange for possibly a pardon?
Well, I don't think there's any explicit promise, but they must have known that she would be interested in some type of pardon or commutation that would cut her sentence down. I mean, I guess the question at the end of the day is, you know, what would the political fallout for President Trump be for offering that kind of pardon? He's certainly shown in the past that he's willing to offer pardons to people who are his friends and associates, which we should mention. You know, President Trump is not a totally detached party here. He has a previous relationship with both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. So, you know, that I think that's really an open question. I doubt there's an explicit promise on the table at this point, but her lawyer has made quite clear that that's what she's in the market for. And so we have to assume that these discussions are designed to advance that, because as Brendan said, I think the notion of them advancing another criminal prosecution of some sort related to Epstein is very remote.
So a New York Times article called the DOJ's involvement here rife with potential pitfalls and complexities, that it may have an extension to the president in some way. Do you agree with that? Josh,
yeah, I do agree with that. And I also think it's interesting. It could be that Todd Blanche had to pursue these discussions himself because, you know, people in the Justice Department might have been very, very nervous about getting deeply involved in this matter, given the role that President Trump has already expressed here, given the difficulties that the Justice Department has had in other high-profile prosecutions where it has essentially thrown the line prosecutors over the side. And in fact, of the prosecutors who prosecuted Epstein, at least up to the point of his suicide, and then prosecuted Maxwell successfully, I think only one of the significant prosecutors on that case remains on the Justice Department's payroll. So they may have just decided the simplest thing to do here was to have Blanche handle this rather than get into a big kerfuffle with their own personnel.
I covered the Ghislaine Maxwell case. It was a long-running case. We heard a lot of evidence presented there. Maxwell's lawyer says that she was compliant, that she answered all the questions, she didn't take the fifth. So what could they possibly be getting out of her?
In an ordinary interview, you'd start by asking questions that you knew the answer to, right? To make sure that she's actually being honest. And then you transition to questions that you don't know the answers to see if she has interesting information that could be useful for a future prosecution. But I think the point that all of us are making right now is that Maxwell isn't a particularly credible witness, isn't going to be useful for a future prosecution, which makes you ask, well, what information would this president and this deputy attorney general want? Presumably, they'd love a bunch of names of political enemies that could be implicated, either legally or in the realm of public opinion.
But isn't it also possible they could hear President Trump's name come up there, too?
I think if Maxwell and her lawyer are smart, they will probably not be uttering his name.
Fair enough. Yamiche, politically speaking, what was the strategy behind the Justice Department re-interviewing Maxwell? Clearly, it appears to be an attempt to try to tamp down some of this blowback over the DOJ essentially not releasing the Epstein files.
Yeah, well, I mean, I talked to a White House official just yesterday who acknowledged that this is something that's not going away, this issue of the Epstein files and the president's own base pushing for more transparency. So the president, as well as the Department of Justice, is hoping that they can continue to try to give people information and actions that make them feel as though that they are doing as much as possible to get to the bottom of if there's anybody that could be charged in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. But the politics of this are just extraordinary because we just haven't seen something stick to President Trump in the way that this Epstein political fallout is sticking to him, especially because it's his own supporters. Some of the most prominent conservative voices are the ones accusing him at times of a cover-up and saying that he needs to do more to reveal what Jeffrey Epstein was up to and what his associates might have been up to and other people who maybe have been breaking the law. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the next few weeks go because the president is eager, obviously, to move on from this. He's asked his supporters to move on. He's insulted them, calling them weaklings, but they just have not been able to shake this story.
Yeah, and speaking of, he's been pressed repeatedly about this. Take a look at what Trump said with regard to possibly pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell yesterday.
A lot of people are asking me about pardons. Obviously, this is no time to be talking about pardons. But a lot of people have asked about pardon. This is just not a time to be talking about pardons.
Is there any legal reason that Trump would pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, or is this really just about politics here?
Having a pardon would undermine all of her credibility in future testimony. To Josh's point, that probably will make it hard for him to do. What might be a little bit more plausible is might want to try to get her sentence reduced in exchange for naming a bunch of folks they want named.
Hey, Josh, one more question to you. Will the DOJ release any of the transcripts or any of the information that they potentially got out of Maxwell?
I'd be surprised if that happens in the near future. They are talking about making that information public, but there's a lot of layers and complexities there, especially given that everything we've discussed here is whether she will implicate third parties, other people that have never been charged criminally in connection with this case. And so it would be a pretty extraordinary step by the Justice Department that doesn't normally do that sort of announcement or inquest kind of investigation where they sort of lay out all the facts that happened in a situation and name names. They usually prosecute people if they think there's criminal liability and they move on. So it would be a very, very rare step. Let's put it that way.
Brendan, Josh, and Yamiche, thanks for being with us on this Saturday. We appreciate you.